All right, welcome to another Small Business Pivots. Today we have a special guest from around the world, and as I say week to week, only the business owner can say their name and their business like the business owner. So introduce yourself, where you're from, and your business.
Yeah, so my name is Kyle York. I'm CEO and managing partner of a firm called York IE. We're an advisory and venture capital firm for tech companies. And we are headquartered in the Granite State, which is New Hampshire. We're about an hour north of the city of Boston.
Fantastic. So you're just a little ways from our headquarters in Oklahoma City, but you said you'd been here and you've got some stories on the IE and all kinds of things. So listeners, you might want to buckle up as we introduce the show, and we will be right back. Welcome to Small Business Pivots, a podcast produced for small business owners. I'm your host, Michael Morrison, founder and CEO of Boss, where we make business ownership simplified for success. Our business is helping yours grow. Boss offers business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. All right, welcome back to Small Business Pivots. How do you think we're going to help our listeners today?
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for small business. I think there's incredible momentum in the kind of business climate, especially in America here with the latest election results and inauguration. There seems to be a lot of excitement for both the Main Street entrepreneur and the world I work in, which is more technology startups. And where I think we're all hoping for more funding and lower interest rates and just continued consumer spending, and that benefits all of us. So excited to talk today about the life of an entrepreneur and how there's no straight line, right, Michael, to success in these businesses.
Yeah, it's and just to kind of give a timeline, I think it's important because we did just have the inauguration at the time of this recording 2 days ago, and just yesterday, our new president announced a very robust AI So I think this is it's going to be interesting to see what we talk about today, and just in a matter of a year, like how things are different. So let's go ahead and get started first with, I know for a lot of business owners, they relate to people that they can kind of connect with. So what was your upbringing? I know a lot of people have a different upbringing, but that way we kind of get a place and sense of where you are today.
Yeah, I think it's going to be quite relevant for the audience. I grew up here in New Hampshire, small town New Hampshire. I think the population of the state is just north of 1 million for the whole state. And the city and town I grew up in, 150 or so thousand people combined. So you could kind of get a little perspective. Hour north of Boston, I grew up in a small business. My parents were entrepreneurs. My grandparents were entrepreneurs. Generation one of that small business was actually an athletic footwear manufacturing business that made athletic footwear long before the days of Nike and Reebok and Under Armour. Business started in the 1940s.
I didn't think there was anything other than Nike and Reebok. And
I know, isn't it weird to think? I actually ask that all the time. I'm like, was it like a big brand? And it's like, it wasn't like your shoes were branded, back then. It was like, that's what Nike innovated. And it's like, and the name of that was actually called Indian Head Shoe Manufacturing Company. And many listeners might have even had, because they had like ice skates, and still on eBay today, I can find old shoes and football cleats and soccer cleats and bowling shoes. It's really cool. And that business ran for about through into the 70s. And my father actually married in, and he was a shoe salesman and ended up building the outlet store for the manufacturer. And then when the manufacturing business shut down at retirement age at Gen 1, my dad turned that for the next 45 years into a Main Street sporting good retail and team outfitter. So they did like uniforms, equipment, for the high schools, little leagues, Pop Warner teams, colleges locally. And that's where myself and my 4 brothers, I'm one of 5 sons to my parents, Don and Gail. I'm the middle, which is so obvious at the end of this podcast, but I'm the middle.
Hey, I'm in your camp. I'm the middle child.
Yeah, yeah, same thing, right? We're middle child or podcast hosts and guests.
Yeah.
It sounds like, but and I grew up, in the Main Street, small business, and this is days again before big box stores. There was no Dick's or Modell's or internet, where you could buy a glove on Amazon. You went into the local mom and pop shop and got fitted for your shoes and your glove and your equipment, for sport. And so that's where we all learned business. And, I always say, like, growing up in a small business, you learn business fundamentals really, really well. And it's funny to be in tech where so much funding goes into it and companies lose money to build big businesses. It's so backwards from, like, if you're a Main Street entrepreneur, you need to make more money than you spend, and you need to make a profit to go on vacation, and it's just a different vibe. But what my parents did really well is and I can carry this forward to my career, is they really, like, vertically integrated their businesses. Like, they bought the real estate, they had the retail store, but then they had the team sales, and then they had they ended up launching a screen printing and embroidery business that would do the uniforms and the hats, and then they ended up building an arena, not as big as your Oklahoma City Thunder project, but there's an arena here for 10,000 people that they built across the streets, and then they did parking, and and that's the life of a entrepreneur, right? It's like to capitalize on, your brand, your community, your footprint. And my parents taught us that really well along the way in our lives.
What would you say for those parents that are entrepreneurs? What would you say was probably the biggest thing you learned from your parents being an entrepreneur, just so they have something to hand down to their kids?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about entrepreneurship that I fell in love with is, like, it's the kind of, like, stick it to the man, like the not working for anyone else, mindset. Like, I ended up, I'll tell this more in a few minutes, but I ended up building a tech business that we sold to Oracle, and independently building the tech business was very different than working after the acquisition for Oracle, which was, at the time, a couple 100,000 employees, right? And so it was kind of that independent spirit and the sort of, like, control of your own destiny. And, like, that to me was, like, even if it was hard, right? And even my dad always had to answer calls on weekends and nights and, go in if the burglar alarm went off or there was a leak in the roof or whatever. Like, it was that kind of ultimate accountability and that independence that, like, really stuck with me and led to my entrepreneurial career in technology.
That's interesting because my kids, one is in his mid-20s, fixing to be, and that's what he strives to do, is the freedom of not having to answer the man.
Yeah, I think it's, and the thing I would say to any young, kid getting into their career is also, like, you got to find the hooks in your work, like the passion, because, like, it's one thing to have the freedom, but imagine you have the freedom in something you don't even like to do. Like, you really need to, like, want to get up every day. Like, I can remember my dad, he'd make it home for dinner every single night. And all of our sports, he never missed them, but he did go into the office every day at like 6 a.m., and, he was gone, right? He was out really early in the morning because he had to make those trade-offs and sacrifices. Well, if he didn't, like, love the business and love working in sports and selling coaches and athletic directors, and he grew up as an athlete and he's in the Hall of Fame of the city of Manchester, and he loves that environment, then yeah, it would have stunk if he was doing something he didn't love, even if he had the freedom. So it's probably balancing those two things. And too often, people wake up 20 years into their career and they're like, and they're say, I don't like what I do. Like, this sucks. Like, and then you're making, like, a career pivot, but it's like, oh man, you're going to throw out 2 decades of experience. Like, there's no line perfect, but you want to at least try to correlate it.
And it's not even relational to the pivots you have to make. So it's not like you really learned anything along the way. So that's a great
that's point. A good point of the pivots. Like, there's pivots that are, like, just iterative evolutions versus there's, like, a complete 180 or shift. And I always try to tell people, like, as you're evolving, like, think of it as iterative steps. Don't think of it as, like, something brand new. So all those things, Michael, led me to my college, I went to undergrad business school. I played actually college football, Division II, and I really early on when I got there, I realized I wasn't going to the NFL. It just took a bit for that to register.
Yeah.
And so right in school, I started to get internships, and I got very lucky to get internships for very small technology companies. And this was early 2000s, and some really great founders, saw my energy and interest and ambition and work ethic, and one of those first internships led to a 7-year run where I stayed through college all the way to a few years out of school. Actually moved me to California, and it was a software business in the education space. They sold software to prep schools, to K-12 private schools, boarding schools, and even moved me to California. That's actually what brought me to Oklahoma City several times. And I just fell in love as I climbed the ladder and kind of sales and marketing functions, which is my background. I just fell in love with, evangelizing, with doing deals, with solving customer problems, and making a dent, right, in whatever industry or sector I was going to go into. And so, it's been that was all very foundational stuff for me.
Quick question, and that is, we all think of Silicon Valley kind of as the hub of tech. And of course, where I'm at, we have hub is really up and coming. It's probably one of the top 3 industries now in our city. Austin Texas is getting real big.
Yep.
Florida, there's some other states. Do you still think, I mean, this is your opinion only, do you think having been there, do you think that's an advantage? Do you think you really learned a lot more, or do you think it's really expanding across the country? Because I know that we have a lot of listeners in the tech space, and they're probably wondering the same thing of, are we really as good as those companies or that talent out there?
Well, I mean, I'm wildly biased here, and I believe you can build a great company anywhere, even in technology. And I believe, especially in this day and age with remote work and offshore development and, Zoom that we're on now, I think it's all just a heck of a lot easier than it was 20 years ago to build a good company anywhere. But I'll tell you what, I lived out in California, and I moved home to become a chief revenue officer of a very early stage technology and infrastructure company. And it was back in my hometown. And many people said I was an idiot to move back from California to New Hampshire to expand upon my technology career. And we took that company from 15 people to 500 and up to 100 million in revenue. And we sold that company to Oracle. And then Larry Ellison, who just announced the AI initiative yesterday with OpenAI and SoftBank that you were referring to in the beginning of the program. So I think now in the year 2025, you can build a tech company anywhere. There is a concentration of companies, and there is a concentration of talent in Silicon Valley, though, and in New York City and in other major tech markets. And there's good and bad to that, right? There's good in that big companies can find the talent they need. There's bad in that small companies have to overpay for talent if they are in those areas, right? So it's why you're actually even seeing a lot of companies create different hubs and offices and remote setups and all that around the country. But I obviously am wildly biased, having built a successful tech career, and now my advisory and venture capital firm in Manchester, New Hampshire. It's not like the hotbed of VC or the hotbed of tech, but we advise and invest in startups all over the world, including in Silicon Valley, right? So I think people should live and work where they want to live and work. I think they should, if that's because they yearn for their own community or to be close to family, or they like the culture in one area or the other, or the weather, or you name it, people should have that choice, and they should be able to build good and successful careers in doing that.
Appreciate you sharing, because I just know of someone last year that moved to California because they thought there was probably more opportunities, more skill sets that they could learn and everything. So that's, and plus the entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And by the way, maybe there are, but there are also way more competition. So good luck with that. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And the company I moved back to New Hampshire for is a company called Dyn. We specialize in what's called the domain name system, but it was like technical infrastructure behind your websites. And our biggest clients in the world were all based in Silicon Valley, the Twitters, the Netflixes, the Salesforce, the Workdays, right? So I spent the majority of my career also in Silicon Valley. And, you come to find out that, you both put your pants on the same way, and you put your shoes on the same way. And, even a lot of people in Silicon Valley, by the way, went to schools on the East Coast and, went to public
That's
schools,
true.
went to private school, right? So they just, Silicon Valley has a head start from the beginnings of like Hewlett Packard and companies in the 1960s who just sort of like created these big trees that drop seedlings down over decades. And, I think a lot of other ecosystems are going to emerge around that. And, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I also am of the belief that every company should be a tech company or technology enabled in some way. And, that's the world we live in. And certainly that's how it's moving with AI. Like, how does AI help augment your organization and your role and make you more efficient and more exceptional, right? And then, I think all these things make the proximity just a bit different.
Great advice and insights for all those questioning their talent level. So your business, York.ie, you have a very interesting story on that. So let's start there.
Yeah, well, I gave you a little bit. So you had asked when we had met prior to the recording, the .ie, and IE stands for investment enterprise, but the .ie is intentional. As I mentioned, my last company we sold to Oracle was a domain name system provider. So we help do internet routing for companies in 4 countries. And so one of our main clients was actually the country of Ireland, and the domain name registry of IEDR, which is .ie. And we spent a lot of time over there. And actually, back to the point we were making around Silicon Valley, many Silicon Valley companies were actually hiring their technical infrastructure talent in Dublin, Ireland, and building pods in there as their entry to Europe and EMEA. And so I spent an incredible amount of time, because those were the buyers of our services at Dyn for domain name management in Dublin. And so I just grew an affinity to it. And originally, I actually launched York.ie as my personal angel investing, advising website, my blog, as a personal thing while I was, working my day job. And when we went to launch the firm, we had this vision that startups need a one-stop resource hub for services and support and infrastructure and capital, and that we thought we could build that firm. You think of us like a modern McKinsey, a modern Bain. That was our vision. And, as we sat around and talked about it, we realized that there was great traffic and great portfolio and great content already at York.ie. And we decided, and my co-founders, it wasn't my idea, I swear to God. They decided hey, you know what, let's just run with what you've already got and build a brand around it. And that's, we've been off and running. And we've been at this for about 5 years. York.ie's core operating business provides what we call advisory as a service to technology companies. We have resources to support you across research and development, think software development, mobile app development, more technical services. We have go-to-market services to help you with messaging, positioning, content, PR, those types of things. And then we also have G&A services to help with financial planning, financial modeling, bookkeeping, tax, those types of things. And we've technology enabled. We're experts in all the technology stacks across R&D, go-to-market, and G&A. And we have a massive team in India. So York.ie is globally about 200 people. We have about 35 or so here in New Hampshire in our headquarters, but then we have about 170 in India, where I'm actually heading end of next week to visit. Wow. So it's all full-time employees globally. It's all our own captive IP, proprietary data and tools, and our own teams that really become an extension of the startups and technology companies we work with. And then we also have an investment fund. We're a venture capital firm. We invest in early stage B2B software businesses. That's our thesis. SaaS is what it's called, the software as a service subscription business model. That's where we focus. And, we have 60 portfolio companies, and we've deployed around $60 million in these companies. So we have a really big investment base and a really awesome and exciting group of companies that we support.
What triggered you to take...
You're listening to Small Business Pivots. This podcast is produced by my company, Boss. Our business is helping yours grow. Boss offers business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share it as well. Now let's get back to our special guest.
What triggered you to take the leap of faith into entrepreneurship? I know you were raised in the entrepreneurial world, but for a lot of listeners, they're like, I got this great idea, but I like my paycheck.
Yeah, with me, it was kind of DNA, and it was pretty organic. I was really young when I joined startups, right? And as much as I took some risks to join them, I was at an age where I didn't have a family yet. I didn't have a mortgage. I had fluidity and flexibility in my life. I could take some risk, right? And I could not just chase the paycheck, but also chase the experience and the opportunity and see where it went. I was fortunate to join great companies, right, with great entrepreneurs and founders. And in my company Dine that we scaled and sold to Oracle, I was just really fortunate that it was a complementary parts fit. The founders were engineers; they were very technical. They didn't have a sales and marketing business growth guy, and I was able to come in and build all those teams and systems and processes and organizations, and be like entrepreneurial in a very entrepreneurial environment. That led me to launch a bunch of other companies, investments companies and real estate companies and other things. We even launched a shoe brand called York Athletics to honor the family.
Wow.
And so we have all these different businesses. And then really it was kind of after my exit, which was a life-changing financial event for myself and future generations, that I sit there and really reflect on I'm in my mid-30s at the time. What am I going to do the next, I don't know, next half of my life?
Yeah.
Right. And I kind of looked in the mirror and I was like, if there's a way for me to build a startup of my own that can help other startups and invest in other startups and be this community that can kind of help others achieve the mountaintop, whatever that might be, right? Whether that's financial independence, whether that's some big exit someday to a big, tech business, doesn't matter, everything in between. I just wanted to kind of go see what I could do and build that. I also didn't in my world, a lot of people who are successful exits just become venture capitalists. And that just seemed kind of boring to me. I didn't want to just show up at the board meetings and, govern businesses. I do that too, don't get me wrong, but I wanted to still have a business of my own that I was trying to grow and scale and hire teams and, really try to inspire. So for me, it was organic phases and steps. And, obviously an exit or a financial event makes it easier to take risk, relatively. But, I'm going for it, right? I mean, I kind of have there's a great line in the movie Rounders about you can't lose what you don't put in the middle, but you can't win much either. It's like a great Matt Damon, John Malkovich movie. And that's some lines like that I always kind of whisper in my ears, and I'm like, all right, let's keep at it. Right.
What advice would you offer tech people trying to build something? Because I'm sure there's more than a dozen or so people trying to come up with the next big software, probably like a million billion people. Yeah. Everybody's got a great idea. So what would you say is that you've learned being in that space? What some insights you could offer?
Yeah, I mean, it really just comes down to the business building execution. I think everybody's got an idea. Like you said, I got 50 ideas in my brain, but if you can't go all in and, build organizations and teams around you to go execute on those ideas, it's just an idea, right? And, when we meet a startup who has a good idea, we call it the market in approach to company building. And what I find a lot of times is ideas that come from, especially engineering technology founders, tend to be I know I can build it ideas, not the market needs this. And here's how I competitively differentiate this idea from anyone else who might try to build it. So that's the market in approach. It's studying your market, looking at competitors, looking at comparators, looking at the legacy players, looking at the innovators, understanding how you can carve your unique path, your wedge into the market that you can then scale upon. So that's the challenge. In tech, it's no one builds it. No one attempts to build a small tech company. You're not trying to build a tech company that's a small business. The reason people build tech companies is to build something big. And I think that's a really, you got to really know what you're signing up for when you get into that, right? And same thing with raising venture capital. Like you need to, if you're going to raise outside money, even if it's angel money or bank debt money, like you just need to know what you're signing up for. And when you raise venture capital, you're actually like selling a little bit of your company to a partner, right? Like they own a piece of it. So you really need to know what you're getting into when you're building it. You know, I wish I had a magic formula. You know, we make a lot of investments. We advise a lot of startups. You know, sometimes the ones I think are going to be the biggest end up flopping. Sometimes the ones I question become the biggest, right? All you can kind of do in the world I play in is try to help steward as many along as possible. Clearly, when you're an entrepreneur doing your own thing, though, you're making a bet on one. And what I remind people many times is when you start a startup or you join a startup, you're betting on yourself just as much as you are the startup. And, you know, that's a test of resolve, of persistence, of salesmanship, of follow through. There's a lot that kind of goes into it that, you know, it's not easy. It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, no, it's not. Well, I have a question for probably more of your service-based businesses,
Yeah.
but this is applicable because in your world, technology changes on a dime. And so, for instance, the recent guest we just had, now this was a long time ago, but they had this bright idea in the 90s. They built the software. They got a humongous client thinking they were set for life, and then the internet came around. You know, so their software was irrelevant now. And so in the tech world that you're in, that probably happens every day. So but in the kind of the service-based world, we have a little bit more notice, if you will. So how do you move quickly to know where those pivots are? Iterations.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I think what's interesting for us is on the investments business, we only do tech and software and SaaS. On our advisory business, we sort of work with any company who wants to grow or who wants to be more technology led or like implement technology. Doesn't mean they need to become a technology company, but even services businesses are trying to figure out how to better leverage tech to do better service delivery or make themselves more scalable or reach a larger audience. So I think you're right about a little bit more lead time, but at the end of the day, if you're of scale, it's harder to pivot or iterate. If you're smaller, it should be easier to pivot or iterate. And that's kind of the dichotomy I see is like, when I worked at an Oracle, it was very slow moving, right? Even though it had all the resources in the world, getting anything done or reinventing yourself was damn near impossible, right?
Yeah.
When you're a small company and you're a small team, your ability to sort of adapt or die is right staring you in the face every day, right? So I think it's just like realizing that the nature of the smaller business that we may all operate in is not precise, and you can't be so like pig-headed to believe that the idea you had at formation is the same thing you're executing on in 5 years or 10 years or 3 years. And I just think in tech that iterativeness is almost like a little bit more like week to week or day to day or month to month or whatever. But we're in like more service oriented or other more established industries. It might be like you have 6 months or a year to adapt or 3 years to adapt or, but again, there's also like big adaption, of like existential issue. And then there's a lot of micro, I always say it's like in startups, like a lot of death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It's like, even if something great happens, there's always a lot of bad stuff going on beneath the surface, so, and again, it's just more where I see people fail in entrepreneurship is when they don't go in with that as baseline, right? When they go in naively or ignorantly or like, maybe they had a great career in corporate world and they want to like go off on their own and be a consultant or start, a local business. And it's like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, everywhere. And, a lot of times when someone works in a big corporate, they have no clue what's going on in HR and accounting or in legal or right. These are things that are disjointed and not connected to them. Or in a small business, everything's your problem, right? Especially as a CEO, as you know, right? So, that's the type of stuff I like to think about, I do think like entrepreneurship is a DNA thing too, I'm not saying you can't teach it or you can't learn and become better at it, but like you really got to deep down in your core, The amount of people I've seen go really early into startups or start their own startups or join a small business or quit their job to launch a brewery and then hate it. In the end, it's kind of like, if you look at their like personality dynamic and their, resolve, and like some of these, like you hear grit, like some of these like things you think about when you think about an entrepreneur, regardless of type, some people just don't have it, right? Sometimes you need to go do it to figure out if you have it or not. Other times you and I, Michael, can look at them and go, it's going to be tough. I worked with a lot of people at Oracle, for example, when I got acquired there, who were like enamored by, young entrepreneurial guy. I ended up being the GM of our business unit in Oracle. Our group grew to 8,000 people. And a lot of these people who worked there 35 years would come talk to me, and we'd trade notes on career. And I would like walk out of those meetings. I'm like, how could you stay here this long? We used to call them corporate survivors. It was almost like a reality TV show or something. It's like, wait a second, you've had 17 jobs in 30 years, all in different divisions and departments and levels and comp and all this stuff. And like, it's just all about like protecting, your compensation, protecting your stock you were given or earning. It's just like a different ballgame in startups, right?
Yeah. Well, you make a great point, because I know a lot of small business owners or startups, they think if I just get this business to this level, my life will be set. And one of our past guests on the podcast, he said, let me tell you the difference, because he's got a, $500 million company. He said, let me tell you the difference between when I started and now. He said, when I started, it was like riding a Sea-Doo, and you can zip and zag and you're not going to do much harm. You might tip over, crash in the water. You try to make those turns on a yacht, you've got casualties, you've got major damage. And you can't even do that. You can't, like you were saying, in Oracle is like you like moving like
an Oracle. I would equate to like an ocean liner with that, right? Like
that doesn't turn at all.
It doesn't turn at all. Like and sure, like on the ocean liner in the crate in the back, like maybe there's some movement, but like it's tough to turn the whole thing, right? And that's going to take a decade or two decades, right? Oracle Cloud has been a 2-decade thing, and it's starting to pay off, right? Big time. But it's a very different environment, and I think that's really important for people to just recognize as they're thinking about career paths.
Absolutely, because if I always say we don't know what we don't know as entrepreneurs, and until you've been there, you don't know. So I'm just sharing that for those that think there is no magical level that you're going to get to, that all your problems go away and your life is set. Unless you sell it for $1 billion, and then
but I would tell you, even like having lived in a small family business, having worked in small startups, having worked in mid-sized startups, having worked in large startups, having sold my company to one of the top 50 corporations on the planet with the top 5 richest guy at the helm. There's problems at all of them, and they're all actually hard. Every one of them is very hard, and it's just a different level of hard, and there's a different level of context, and there's a different level of perspective you need to have at each of them. But that's like, and then sitting on this side of the table as both now an outside advisor, consultant, and board member of many startups, there's different contexts, there's different stages, there's different perspectives, and they're all hard. And I think what happens too often is people just like kind of pattern map the different stages, or they try to like run the same playbooks or templates or give the same advice. Like one thing that's hard about like a podcast interview, and when you get asked about advice, it's like you have to be pretty generic, because I don't know the situation or context of the listener, right? But if I was sitting one-on-one, I'd be like, all right, tell me more, learn. Okay, well, if I were you, here's how I would think about the next phase of your evolution and growth, right? And then I'm sure you deal with this all the time, right? It's not like you can just give the same advice to the same 5 companies. And also, you also don't even know the philosophies or ambitions or aspirations of the people running them, right? So it's just, it's a unique challenge, I think, in our world to coach and guide when, everybody's very different.
What is a pivot that you would not do or do again, or wish you would have done along the way?
Geez, I don't know. I mean, I think in scaling Dine, that was a really interesting time. We ended up raising a bunch of money by the end of that company from private equity and growth equity. And, I think there was like a window of time where we if we played our cards right, made some interesting product development decisions, some different M&A decisions, could have been an independent company that went public on its own. It didn't, again, isn't this funny perspective I'm giving? Like, we sold for $600 million, and I'm acting like could have been better,
Yeah.
but literally there was a few years in there where I was like, man, if we made this product decision, or we bought this company, or we evolved from deep domain infrastructure to cybersecurity, like, our path ahead could have been very different. But then again, I look back at the context. These are easy things with hindsight. We were all really young. It was like a wild ride. It was high stress, high anxiety. Like, I could barely breathe on the end of that journey, just wanting so bad to see it culminate in a life-changing event, which it did. But you look back sometimes and you're like, I played this a little different. It could have been different. But that's a good problem to have. That's a big pivot. That's a first world problem. All those terminology.
Right.
But again, I've seen it along the day. I could have given my dad advice that he should have gone more digital. He should have franchised. He should have built a website. He could have been the next Dick's. But then he talked to my dad, and he's like, I wasn't going to mess with a good thing.
Right.
He's like, I was incredibly successful. Like, I was able to be a small business owner. Like, I supported 5 sons. I sent you all through college. Like, I used to always ask him, like, why didn't you want any of us to go to school and come back and work here, and help you build this and scale this thing, and, bring in technology and all that. And he's like, well, first of all, number one, I didn't work my ass off to send you everywhere to come back and do this here. Number two, I'm not taking a pay cut to hire you. So, that's the way it is.
Good
and I
points.
used to, over the years, always try to bring software for inventory management, or for credit card processing, or right. And he'd be like, get out of here. I have my way of doing it. I have my systems. Like, so again, that's what I mean about the context, right? Like, he could have tried to go big with it, and it could have imploded and ruined a good thing, right? So I think all these things are very relative. Someone once said to me when I was very young that success is relative. And I think that's a really, really important lens for everyone listening to think about, like, what's relative success to you, and what are you playing for? And that's going to be different for everybody.
So your company, York, who is this for? In other words, like size, industry? I know you said tech, but
on the advisory services business, it's really any company who's looking to take the next level, to grow, who's looking to technology enable their business. So they want to build an app internally or externally, whether they need help with marketing or finance or R&D. We have service capability for all that. Our biggest company client's probably doing a couple $100 million in revenue. Smallest is a brand new idea who wants to build the next great app, right? So it really does fit everywhere in between, but it's definitely like more of a tech-centric, growth-centric ideal customer. We actually partner with a lot of other venture capital firms, private equity firms, banks, law firms who have portfolios of companies who could use help in operating their business. And that's where we come in and support them. And then anyone listening who's building a SaaS business, a B2B software business, that's where we are a seed stage, pre-seed stage investor. Okay. So we're a true investor. It's usually companies have found some initial traction or are looking for a little bit of early growth capital to take it to the next level, but they want that capital not just to be dumb money, with all respect. They want actually help, right? And resources and people who've been there, done that, to support them. And that's what our 200+ person infrastructure can help provide.
I know we've just barely touched the surface of what you do and your experience. How can people follow you directly or get in touch with you to learn more?
Yeah, that's great. I'm across all social channels at KYork20. That's my old football number. I've had that since AOL Instant Messenger in like 93. So, wow. That's my name.
Dating yourself.
Yeah, exactly. It's dating myself. So I'm KYork20. Our firm is York Growth across social media. And our website is york.ie. You can find us everywhere. We're very accessible. I'm all over LinkedIn. You might have to mute me, because I'm always putting out, opining on the state of affairs in our world, right? So, okay. But I really appreciate you having me, Michael. It's been fun.
My pleasure. Well, I will say thank you for the throwback, because I'm not kidding you. And you may have done this to some other people. I forgot when I was a kid that we had to go to a local store to get the numbers ironed on our jerseys, get our shoes fitted. I forgot all about that because I've been so used to Amazon and Dick's and, Academy and all these other stores, but it got so busy at that one store, you had to make an appointment. Like your team had to have an appointment. You had to go in between 2 and 4 on a Tuesday or something, or you weren't getting your jersey in time. I forgot all about that.
So imagine the visceral reaction I have now when I have to go buy one of my 3 kids sporting equipment. Like I just had to get lacrosse gear. My middle child wants to play lacrosse this year, and so I had to buy him all this gear. And it kills me that I can't just go to Indian Head, my dad's old store, and do it with that personal touch where they actually know what they're talking about. They could fit you up and size you up and make sure you buy the right equipment for your performance level. And I have to go kind of like through the commodity factory of Dick's to pick it all up, right? It's just it's a different world. But you're right, a lot of these things are kind of flashback, and it's actually we do a lot of work in other like vertical industries that are like building software for a specific vertical. And so we get a lot of this throwback to like, oh, that's how it's done, pen and paper, or like in person, like there's no digital experience, so we get this a lot in my world.
I bet. Well, I always end with a question, and that is, if you're in a room full of business owners, all sizes, different industries, what's something you could offer to all of them that's applicable? So it could be a quote, a book, some insight, something you learned along the way.
Yeah. So one thing I always talk about is in college, I actually had in one of my classes, you could get a guaranteed A if you brought in a notable guest speaker to class. So and so you get three big projects for the semester, and you get 1 A if you bring in a guest speaker. So I brought in the founder and CEO of Total Gym. You remember that with Christy Brinkley and Chuck Norris? Wow. It was like the infomercial. He was a college teammate of mine's father. And he came in and he told this amazing story about what made him successful. And it was all around honesty, passion, and persistence. And I remember just back then thinking to myself, like, he just had this great way of speaking, because like he was almost like an accidental success. He was like a bodybuilder who wanted to come out, who injured himself in his back, and he wanted to come up with a way to have like low resistance working out that wasn't like heavy dead weight, working out. And it always stuck with me that always be honest, always be persistent, always be passionate. And I think that's what separates.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, you've been a wealth of information and a blessing to many. I appreciate you, Kyle, for sharing with our audience today, and wish you continued success.
You as well. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Small Business Pivots. This podcast is created and produced by my company, Boss. Our business is growing yours. Boss offers flexible business loans with business coaching support. Apply in minutes and get approved and funded in as little as 24 to 48 hours at businessownershipsimplified.com. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and share it as well. If you need help growing your business, email me at michael@michaeldmorrison.com. We'll see you next time on Small Business Pivots.